There's something people often say about Taurus with a mixture of admiration and distrust. They say Taurus is too proud, that it's difficult, that it doesn't pursue what it wants. And those on the outside, watching a Taurus who stood still while someone walked away, almost always interpret that silence the same way: coldness, distance, indifference, as if there were people capable of feeling and people who simply don't care. And Taurus was always being placed in the second category by the easy judgment of those who never knew how to truly see. But what if that interpretation is completely wrong? Because there's something that happens inside Taurus at the exact moment someone leaves and they don't move. Something most people will never truly understand. Not because it's hard to explain, but because to understand it, you need to have felt it. And feeling what Taurus feels requires a capacity few possess, the ability to bear the weight of knowing your worth without needing anyone to confirm it aloud. Taurus doesn't chase after things, but it's not because they don't want to. It's because there's something within this sign, something built over time, brick by brick, experience by experience, that acts as a silent anchor. Not an anchor that binds, an anchor that stabilizes, that says you don't need to leave here to prove you matter. That says what's yours will come to you. That says, in a very low voice, almost imperceptible, your presence is enough. And that's the point no one discusses when talking about Taurus. No one talks about the cost of standing still, about how much it hurts to watch someone leave when everything inside you wants to move. Taurus feels deeply, so deeply that it's sometimes frightening. But between feeling and acting, there's a filter that was built not out of coldness, but out of a silent understanding that chasing after someone who leaves would be a betrayal, not of the other person, of oneself. He thinks of a tree during a storm. It feels the wind. Every branch bends, every leaf trembles. The force of the air passes through it entirely. But the roots don't come loose. Not because the tree doesn't feel the storm, but because the roots know something the wind doesn't. They know where their place is. And Taurus works exactly like that. On the outside, it may seem calm. On the outside, it may seem like nothing is happening. But inside, the storm passes. The difference is that Taurus has learned, or has been forced to learn, not to tear itself from the ground even when everything inside it wants to leave. But this root, where did it come from? No human being is born knowing how to stand still in the face of pain. This is learned, sometimes by choosing to honor one's own dignity, and sometimes by an old wound that taught chasing after something is to diminish oneself. It's surrendering what you hold most precious, your core, to someone who may not even know what to do with it. And that's where Taurus's story really starts to get interesting. This filter didn't appear out of nowhere. It has an origin, a specific point in Taurus's internal history where something changed unceremoniously, almost without Taurus even realizing it. A moment that forever shaped how they love, how they wait, how they let go. But here's the question that will stay with you for a while. Is this stillness wisdom or armor? Because there's a very subtle, dangerously subtle, difference between knowing your worth and using that knowledge to not need anyone. Between having roots and being trapped. Between the peace of someone who doesn't need to run and the silence of someone who has learned not to need to, from no one. This phrase has a weight that Taurus knows very well. And at the same time, there is something in it that needs to be examined very carefully, because independence can be the most powerful thing in the world, and it can also be the most sophisticated disguise for the fear of being hurt. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. And what surprised me wasn't what it said about the strength of Taurus, but what it said about the cost of that strength, about the difference between independence that liberates and independence that isolates. about how Taurus can build so much internally, gather so much solidity, so much inner richness, and at the same time use all of that as justification for never needing anything more. The book doesn't treat Taurus as someone who needs fixing. It treats Taurus as someone who needs to be seen, with all their depth, with all their complexity, and with what lies hidden behind the quietness that the world interprets as coldness. If you're here now, there's a good chance that something in this question has already touched on something you recognize. Maybe it's discomfort. Maybe it's relief. Maybe it's that feeling that you always knew there was something more here, but you never knew how to name it. This is the moment, not later, not whenever. Now, while the discomfort is still active and the question is still alive within you. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And in the comments tell me, have you ever had to explain to someone that not pursuing something doesn't mean not wanting it? How did that conversation go? There's a moment in almost every Taurus's life that no one has photographed, that no conversation has recorded. A silent, probably solitary moment when something has settled inside. Not with noise, not with drama, with the quietude of decisions that change everything without announcing that they are changing. Perhaps it was after a situation where Taurus went after something, with everything honestly, and came back empty-handed. Perhaps it was after realizing that the more he moved towards someone, the more that person retreated. Perhaps it wasn't a single event. Perhaps it was a sum of experiences that accumulated layer by layer until they created a new internal geometry. A geometry that silently reorganized how Taurus perceives movement, value, and love. And in this new geometry, a rule emerged, unwritten, undeclared, but absolutely real. I will not diminish myself to keep anyone. And more than that, I will not chase after those who don't come to me, not because I don't want to, because I know my worth, or because I learned or decided that behaving as if I didn't know would be a betrayal I cannot commit against myself. This decision has a genuine nobility. It has a real integrity, and at the same time, it was made at some point in the past by a version of Taurus that was processing pain. And the question few people ask is, does this decision still serve who Taurus is today? Or is it being applied automatically as a reflex in situations where being flexible would actually be a form of strength? Because there's a huge difference between not pursuing something out of integrity and not pursuing it out of fear. Between standing still because you know your worth and standing still because moving seems too dangerous. This difference is so subtle that Taurus often doesn't see it until someone or something points it out, and then the feeling is strange, not exactly one of discovery, of recognition, of, I always knew this, but I didn't know that I knew. There's an image that stays with me when I think about how Taurus relates to the world, the image of a well, not just any well, an old, deep well, full of clean, cold water, the kind of well that has fed generations, that has history, that has consistency, that has existed for so long that it has become a point of reference. A well doesn't go looking for someone who is thirsty. It stays in place, and whoever knows where the well is, goes to it. Whoever doesn't know, won't go. Not because the well doesn't want to give water, but because that's how wells work. They exist, they are available, they offer what they have, but they don't move, they don't call, they don't convince. They simply are, with a generosity that doesn't need to announce itself because it's structural. It's in the nature of what they are. And Taurus works a lot like that. They have a lot to offer. They have loyalty, depth, a capacity for building and presence that few people can match. But they won't announce it. They won't advertise themselves. They won't chase after those who haven't yet understood what they are. The internal logic is clear. If you can't see the value of what I'm offering without me having to sell it, then maybe you're not the right person to receive it. There's an elegance to this logic, an inner aristocracy that is genuinely Taurus. But there's also a blind spot. Because a well that no one finds, however deep and clean it may be, feeds no one. And a Taurus that never moves, that confuses passive waiting with active dignity. That Taurus can wait a lifetime for someone who simply didn't know there was a well there. Who passed by thirsty on the other side without knowing that the water was 100 meters away. The problem isn't having depth. The problem is when depth turns into isolation, when I know my worth becomes nobody will see me anyway. When patient waiting becomes a story Taurus tells themselves, the story that what's theirs will come, that the right people will appear, while beneath that story, something has silently begun to disbelieve that it will ever come. Here's the paradox that nobody tells you about Taurus. The same mechanism that protects it, this ability not to fall off the ground, not to diminish itself, is the same one that, at a certain point, begins to work against it. The turning point doesn't happen suddenly. It settles in with the same patience with which Taurus builds everything. Slowly, until one day it realizes that what should be a foundation has become a capsule. Imagine a fortress built with a clear purpose to protect those inside. Thick walls, solid structure, controlled entry. For a long time, this fortress was the right thing. What kept Taurus whole during times when staying whole was difficult. It was real protection, not paranoia. But the walls that protect from the outside also define the inside. At some point, arriving slowly without warning, the fortress begins to seem less like a refuge and more like a prison. Not because something from the outside threatened, but because Taurus has been inside for so long that it has forgotten what it's like to be on the other side. What real vulnerability is like. What it's like to truly let someone in. Not just authorize entry, but let what enters stir something inside. Knowing your worth is one of the most powerful things there is. But when that knowledge becomes a reason to never need it, when self-esteem becomes absolute self-sufficiency, and that self-sufficiency becomes a way to never be hurt, what began as protection has become armor. And armor, contrary to appearances, is not strength. It's a sign that you have something too valuable to risk being touched. Where does Taurus's strength end and Taurus's solitude begin? This question doesn't have a universal answer. It has your own answer. Somewhere between what you call worthy and what you use as a shield. Between what you defend as your own value and what you've built so you never have to prove you can be hurt. And if there's anything that can help Taurus find that answer, not with theory, but with the depth that Taurus recognizes as real, it's in the digital book, The Divine Path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose. As a tool for self-discovery, for Taurus who already knows a lot about themselves but needs to name what they know. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. He has something that Taurus rarely admits and often doesn't even realize in himself, that within this whole equation of self-worth and independence and I don't chase after anyone, there is sometimes a shadow, a subtle and silent version of the same mechanism operating in a different way, not only not going after someone who leaves, but distancing himself even before the person decides to go, anticipating, controlling, withdrawing before the withdrawal is imposed. It's a form of protection that Taurus has developed with such elegance that it seems, from the outside and sometimes even from the inside, like maturity, like someone who simply doesn't cling to illusions. But what's happening at the root is something else. It's the system anticipating pain. It's the internal architecture saying, if I distance myself first, I create distance before it comes to me. I am not abandoned, I withdraw. And there's a huge difference between the two things. At least that's what it seems. Imagine a person who loves to plant, who has a real gift for it, for understanding the earth, for patiently caring for what will grow slowly. But after a few failed harvests, they stop planting, not because the gift has gone away, but because the fear of losing the harvest has become greater than the desire to have it. And so the field is prepared, but empty, ready to receive seeds that never arrive. That's exactly what happens to Taurus when the armor kicks in. They stop planting. They start keeping people at a calibrated distance, close enough not to seem closed off, but far enough away that if they leave, the loss is bearable. And there lies the highest price. Taurus begins to protect themselves from losses that haven't yet happened, and loses, in the process, connections that could have been real. Can Taurus truly love when a part of them is always ready to let go? That's the crux of the matter. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, touches on exactly that, what separates true strength from protection disguised as strength, and how Taurus can replant without giving up on knowing what is worthwhile. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Beneath it all, beneath the deep roots, the fortress, the silent resolve, the armor that sometimes seems like independence and sometimes like solitude, lies a desire that Taurus carries with such discretion that sometimes even he loses sight of it. A desire so simple and so profound at the same time that it seems almost naive when spoken aloud. But it's there. It always has been. Taurus doesn't want to be chased. They don't want people chasing after them as if they were a prize to be won through persistence. That's not it. What Taurus wants, what Taurus truly wants deep down, is someone who stays, without being asked, without needing an invitation. Someone who sees everything, the depth, the stillness, the complexity, the cost, and chooses to stay anyway. Someone who recognizes the value without Taurus needing to show it off. Someone who feels the depth without needing it to be proven on the surface. Taurus wants proof that doesn't need to be asked for. And that's exactly why they don't chase after someone. Because in Taurus's inner understanding, chasing would be the exact opposite. It would be asking the other person to stay. It would be showing need before the other person shows value. And Taurus decided, at some point somehow, unceremoniously, that they won't do that. They'll wait. They'll stay put. And they'll see who comes along on their own. Think about gravity, the most fundamental force in the universe, the one that holds everything in place, planets, stars, entire galaxies. Gravity doesn't chase anything. It doesn't run. It doesn't convince. It doesn't beg. It simply is. And by the simple fact of being with absolute consistency, everything gravitates towards it. Taurus understands this instinctively. But here's what gravity doesn't have and Taurus does. Gravity doesn't feel. Taurus feels, and beneath all the solidity, all the stillness, all the independence that Taurus displays so naturally, there is someone who also wants to receive, who wants to be found without needing to hide where they are, who wants someone to come and stay, for the connection to be reciprocal without anyone needing to run. What would life be like for a Taurus if they could receive with the same intensity with which they sustain everything? If the capacity to be a root, to be ground, also existed in the opposite direction, to let something sustain you. If Taurus could trust that moving once towards something that feels real is not betrayal but courage. This is the space that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose explores. Not only what Taurus has to offer, but what they allow themselves to receive. And why this permission is sometimes the most difficult thing there is. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an image that lingers when everything said here begins to settle. The image of the earth, Not the dramatic earth of volcanoes, the quiet earth, the one that lies beneath everything, that sustains every root, every seed, every life that grows upon it, that gives without asking for anything in return, that exists with such absolute consistency that the world has forgotten to notice, because it has always been there, and this permanence has become invisible because of its certainty. The earth doesn't chase after anything. It doesn't need to. Everything that needs to grow, grows in it. Everything that needs sustenance, you find in it. Not because the earth promoted itself, not because it convinced anyone that it was good earth, but because the earth simply is what it is, with such complete wholeness, that being necessary is just a natural consequence of existing. And that's how Taurus deep down works. It's not coldness, it's not pride, it's not difficulty. It's the profound dignity of someone who knows they don't need to move to be essential. It's the inner richness of someone who has built so much internally that the surface remains quiet. Because when the interior is so solid, there's no need for noise. Noise is for those who need to attract attention, and Taurus never needed to attract attention. They only needed people to know how to look. But the earth also has seasons. It has harvest times and rest times. It has periods when it gratefully receives the seeds, and periods when it allows itself to be renewed by the rain that comes from outside. The most fertile land in the world is not the one that never receives. It is the one that knows how to receive in the right measure, at the right time, without losing what it is. And perhaps the most beautiful invitation for Taurus, the one that remains after everything explored here, is precisely this: to continue being the earth, to continue having roots, to continue knowing what is worthwhile, and at the same time to remember that the earth is not inert. It breathes, it transforms, it receives, and is more fertile because of what it receives. Not chasing after something doesn't mean never moving. It means not betraying yourself, not diminishing yourself to be accepted, not bending what is essential out of fear of silence. But within that there is a possible mobility that is not weakness. It is a conscious choice. It is Taurus deciding with open eyes when to stay and when to go, not out of old reflexes, not out of wounds, but out of true self-knowledge. Because the rarest strength isn't the one that never moves. It's the one that knows when movement makes sense. And Taurus, with all its depth, with all its roots, with all the silent beauty of being so deep that few reach its depths, has that strength. It always has. What this video aimed to do was simply help you see it, not as a limit to be accepted, as a starting point for everything that can still be built.